Irwin, Jones, Jones Sawyer, Kim, Lackey, Levine, Linder, Lopez, Lowe, Mainshine, Mathis, Mays, McCarty, Medina, Melendez, Mullen, Nazarian, Obernolte, O'Donnell, Olson, Patterson, Quirk, Brendan, Ridley Thomas, Rodriguez, Salas, Santiago, Steinorth, Stone, Thurmond, Ting, Wagner, Waldron, Weber, Wilk, Williams, Wood. Madam Speaker.
I'd like to ask our guests and visitors in the rear of the chamber and in the gallery to please stand for the prayer. Today's prayer will be offered by Father Papademus. Father Papademus.
Good morning. Let us pray. Lord, we sometimes wonder what your will is for our life. Oftentimes we look for big things, signs and supernatural events. But really, your will for us unfolds each and every day as we obey you and serve you with a thankful heart. Lord, help us keep the right perspective. We all have goals and dreams, but the way we live our life today is what's going to get us where we need to be tomorrow. Amen.
I'd like to ask our guests and visitors to please remain standing and join us for the flag salute. Please join Assemblymember Campos as she joins us. She leads us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. Reading of the previous day's journal.
Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, Monday, February 1st, 2016. The Assembly met at 12 noon. Honorable Kevin Mullins.
Mr. Holden moves and Ms. Waldron seconds that the reading of the previous day's journal be dispensed with. Presentation of petitions, there are none. Introduction and reference of bills will be deferred. Reports of committees will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. Messages from the governor, there are none. Messages from the Senate, there are none. Moving now to motions and resolutions, to absences for legislative business. Assembly Members Baker and Levine. For personal business, Assembly Members Bonta and Gaines. And for illness, Assembly Member Hadley. This time we're going to move to procedural motions. Mr. Holden, you're recognized for your motions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 118 and allow Assembly Member Burke to have guests and photographers on the floor today.
Without objection, that request is granted.
Mr. Speaker, I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 45.5 and allow Assembly Members Brown, Chu, Cooley, Dolly, Gibson, and Linder to speak on adjourned memories today.
And without objection, that request is granted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. We don't have any guest introductions at this time. We're going to move to business on the daily file. Second reading, there is no second reading at this time. On concurrence, we're going to pass and retain file item 1. On the reconsideration items, items 5 and 6, we're going to continue those items. Moving to Assembly third read, we're going to pass and retain file items 7, 8, and 9. And at this time, we're going to pass temporarily file item 10. We're going to go to file item 11, ACR 104. The clerk will read.
Assembly Concurrent Resolution 104 by Assemblymember Rodriguez relative to the Officer Sean Diamond Memorial Highway.
Colleagues, if I could ask you to please keep your conversations to a minimum. Mr. Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise today to present ACR 104. This resolution dedicates a portion of the Interstate 10 freeway in Los Angeles County as the Officer Sean Diamond Memorial Highway. Officer Diamond passed away on October 29, 2014 after being wounded while carrying out a search warrant in the city of San Gabriel. During my time on the board of the Downtown Pomona Owners Association, I had the great privilege to work with Sean, who was assigned to the downtown Pomona area. Sean was a dedicated officer and honorable man, known for his strong work ethic and generosity. Officer Diamond served for 16 years over the course of his career in the Los Angeles, Montebello, and Pomona police departments. He worked tirelessly to protect his community by serving on dozens of SWAT operations and training new recruits. Further, he acted as a community liaison and volunteered his time at events such as Special Olympics and did SWAT and canine demonstration for school children. Officer Diamond's bravery and passion will serve and will never be forgotten, and I ask that we humbly commemorate his life and legacy with ACR 104. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Rodriguez, would you like the first roll to be open for co-authors?
Yes.
Okay. The clerk will open the roll. Members, this is for co-authors. This is for co-authors. The clerk will close the roll, and at this time there are 50 co-authors added. We need to take a roll call vote on this. The clerk will open the roll on this item. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 51, noes 0. Measure passes. We're going to go back to file item 10 for purposes of amendments, ACR 114. The clerk will read.
Assembly Concurrent Resolution 114 with amendments by Assemblymember Gallagher.
Mr. Gallagher, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to offer amendments to ACR 114. These amendments will change Grand Jury Awareness Month from February to March. Thank you. Ask for your support.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, we can take a voice vote on these amendments. All those in favor, please say aye. All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. The amendments are adopted. The bill is out to print and back on file. Moving now to file item 12, ACR 117. The clerk will read.
Assembly Concurrent Resolution 117 by Assemblymember Lackey relative to Ronald Reagan Day.
Mr. Lackey, you may open. Colleagues, please, if you could keep your conversations to a minimum. Mr. Lackey, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm honored to bring forward ACR 117 to commemorate the 105th anniversary of President Ronald Reagan's birthday, which will be this Saturday. In many ways, President Reagan's rise from humble beginnings to the most powerful office in the United States epitomizes the opportunities that California has offered so many individuals. As the most recent Californian to serve in the Oval Office, I'm proud to walk the same halls as President Reagan and see his statue here in the Capitol. I believe one of the reasons why President Reagan's legacy is so powerful is because he was focused on optimism. He appealed to our greatest strengths instead of our worst fears. He had an enduring belief that the United States could overcome any challenge if we put our minds to it. In an era where some presidential candidates choose to use cynical campaigning and fear-mongering, we would do well to remember his legacy. One of my favorite moments of his presidency was in 1987 when he boldly stood in front of the Berlin Wall and told the Soviets, "Tear down this wall." Something that was impossible to imagine at that time, yet only 2 years later became a reality. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Lowe, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. I also join in support of ACR 17. As many of us recall in our history, Mr. Reagan opposed the Briggs Initiative of 1978, also known as Proposition 6, would have made it legal to fire a teacher if they were known to be gay. They could also be fired if they advocated in support of homosexuality. Obviously, we know that as a presidential candidate, this could have eroded his base, and yet he stood in support of knowing what is right for all of California and for the United States. And with that, I join in support of this resolution.
Mr. Alejo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, also rise to point out what we all know to be true, that it was 30 years ago, this coming November 6th, that President Reagan signed the Immigration Reform and Control Act that allowed a pathway to citizenship to over 3 million Americans who had that opportunity to become a U.S. citizen and be able to take that oath and become a voting member of our society. It was one of the most profound impacts on immigrants from all over the world that call this great nation their home. So as we celebrate his birthday, we also have to commemorate the ability at one point in time in our nation's capital where Congress members and senators were able to work across party lines, find common ground, and find solutions to the most pressing problems facing our nation. We have a lot to learn, well, at least those in Washington have a lot to learn from the legislators of that era. But I'm proud that here in Sacramento, we've been able to also try to lead by example and show the rest of the nation that on issues such as immigration, we could also follow that example of President Reagan and fighting bipartisanship.
Mr. Cooley, you're recognized.
Colleagues, I rise in support of ACR 117. Ronald Reagan built a legacy here in California because of his leadership on key environmental issues. During his tenure as governor, he supported creation of the Redwood National Park here in the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, which has been essential to the preservation of the clarity of the waters of Lake Tahoe and constraining development in that region. He signed legislation created the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and that added thousands of acres to our state park system, including 2 Pacific Ocean underwater preserves. He also signed the California EPA Act in 1967, which established air quality standards in that era when there was such great concern for smog and the effects on health, and California's breaking new ground with that. And then in 1970, he signed our CEQA Act, California Environmental Quality Act, to change the way we approach projects in California. And I personally have been a benefactor of his leadership. There was a time when there was a thought to move into the High Sierra and build a resort in the Ansel Wilderness above Red's Meadow. And he took a trip of lawmakers, government officials, went up there on horseback, camped for a few days, marched out and held a press conference saying there will be no new road through the Sierras, there will be no resort there. Every year, colleagues, lawmakers continue to take a trip in the Eastern Sierra. It's a very fun occasion. And so Ronald Reagan has touched our lives, our state in many ways through his environmental initiatives. And beyond the maximum that tax the fellow behind the tree.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, Mr. Lackey, you may close.
Yes, I'd just like to thank my colleagues for their remarks in support of this important resolution, and I ask for the first roll to be open for co-authors.
The clerk will open the roll. Members, this is for co-authors. Members, this is for co-authors. The clerk will close the roll. There are 62 co-authors added. And without objection, we will take a voice vote on this measure. All those in favor, please say aye. All opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted. Moving now to file item 13, ACR 122. The clerk will read.
Assembly Concurrent Resolution 122 by Assemblymember Burke, relative to American Heart Month and Wear Red in California.
Ms. Burke, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. 44 million women in the U.S. are affected by cardiovascular disease. Heart disease is the #1 killer of women. If you think it can't happen to you or one of your loved ones, you're wrong. 90% of us have one or more of the risk factors for developing heart disease. The statistics are startling, and they are the necessary reminder that when it comes to preventing heart disease and stroke, we need to step it up. Today, women comprise less than a quarter of the participants in heart-related studies. This needs to change. We need research, outreach, and prevention programs that target women and their specific needs. Every year, the Go Red for Women campaign encourages women to take charge of their own health. It's more than just a day to wear red. This is an opportunity for each and every one of us to take the message back to our districts and work with women in our communities towards better health and a brighter future. Remind those in our communities to go to wellness exams, eat healthy, and participate in physical activity. Go Red. I respectfully request an aye vote on ACR 122.
I'd like to recognize Ms. Christina Garcia.
Good morning, members. The Legislative Women's Caucus is proud to sponsor the 12th year Capitol Goes Red and support ACR 122. We have a commitment to this issue. We have joined together with the American Heart Association to make the lives of women better. In the last decade, Go Red for Women and the Capitol Goes Red campaign has helped women lead healthier lives and make healthy behavior changes. Women's deaths in California have dropped by 30% in the last 10 years. We are part of that change. Thank you, members. I ask for your support on ACR 122 and thank our colleague from Silicon Beach for championing this issue on behalf of the Women's Caucus and for the 19 million women and girls in California.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, Assemblymember Burke, would you like the first roll to be open for co-authors? Colleagues.
Oh, sorry. I respectfully request an aye vote and that the roll be open for co-authors.
The clerk will open the roll. Members, this is for co-authors. This is for co-authors. The clerk will close the roll. We have 66 co-authors added. And without objection, we'll take a voice vote on this measure. All those in favor, please say aye. All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it, and the resolution is adopted. At this time, I'd like to go back to guest introductions and recognize Assemblymember Burke. Assemblymember Burke. For your guest introduction.
Oh, my guest introduction. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we're joined by some outstanding advocates for heart disease. Please welcome Courtney Wilson with the Sutter Heart and Vascular Institute, American Heart Association volunteer, author, and aspiring cardiologist Savannah Carmu, her father, Q Carmu, and their fellow American Heart Association volunteers Renee Chambers, Lauren Meeks Harris, Karen Chang, and Ashley Wickland. They're here to help us celebrate Wear Red Day and joining the Heart Association in room 125 for free health screenings, CPR training, and blood pressure checks this morning until noon for all of us.
Finishing up business on the daily file, we're going to pass and retain file item 14 under third reading, and then for file items 15 and 16, we're also going to pass and retain the Senate third reading items. There are no consent calendar items, so that concludes the business on the daily file. At this time, we're going to move to adjournments in memory, as well as announcements. There were a number of members that were granted prior permission to speak on an adjourn in memory. Members, if I could please ask you to take your seats. Thank you very much. I would like to first recognize Mr. Dolly for your adjourn in memory.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I would like to adjourn today in memory of Melvin Jackson, who was the resident of Feather Falls. Melvin served the United States Army as a sharpshooter and served his family and his tribe, the Moortown Rancheria, as vice chairman from 2001 until his death, January 30th, 2016. Melvin was a pillar in his community and will be sorely missed. My thoughts and prayers are with the Jackson family and the Moortown Rancheria during this difficult time. Thank you, members.
I'd like to recognize Mr. Gibson for his adjournment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise today to request that this body adjourn in memory of the Los Angeles Superior Court Judge Eleanor C. DeShazer. Judge DeShazer began her career on the bench in 1989 when she was appointed by the Municipal Court Judge Association as the Municipal Court Judge Commissioner. Excuse me. She held this position until 1995 when she was appointed by Governor Pete Wilson to the Compton Municipal Court Judgeship. In 1998, she helped open the Compton Drug Court. Elevating the Los Angeles Superior Court in 2000, she helped implement Proposition 36, which established a drug treatment-based model for drug offenders charged with simple possessions. As a native of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Eleanor DeShazer, after graduating from high school, took her job at the regional phone company, later transferred to positions in Houston, Detroit, and Los Angeles. In Houston, she supplemented her income by working at the Astrodome as a glorified usher. She would share that one precious moment in her experience in serving as a ring girl at the internationally broadcast heavyweight bout between Muhammad Ali and Jimmy Ellis. Members, I respectfully ask that this body adjourn in the memory of a true drum major for justice, Judge Eleanor C. DeShazer.
I'd like to recognize Ms. Brown for your adjournment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I ask this body to adjourn in the memory of a veteran civil rights advocate, Jerry Inamoto, who passed away January 17th at the age of 89 years old in the city of Fontana, California. Although Mr. Inamoto was my constituent at the time of his passing, his activism is well known and documented here in the Sacramento area. His accomplishments and honors have benefited all of us in some way. My colleague from Rancho Cordova will share with you Mr. Inamoto's legacy.
I'd like to recognize Mr. Cooley.
Colleagues, it's an honor here to ask we adjourn today in honor of Jiro Jerry Inamoto. He stands out. He was a second-generation Japanese-American, loyal American, leader in law enforcement, leader in civil rights. He passed away on January 17th of this year, as stated in Fontana, his new home for the last several years. He grew up in San Francisco. He attended Lowell High School, and it was during his time at Lowell that the Second World War came upon us, and amid the tide and passions of those times, he was pulled out of San Francisco with his family, relocated to Northern California, Tule Lake, to an internment camp, as was happening in that era. Jerry was undeterred by this. He continued his academic studies, completing them as a valedictorian. Having done that, he went on to the University of California at Berkeley, where he earned his undergraduate and master's degrees. He had a long career in law enforcement. 28 years after the war, he served in corrections, and he was a trailblazer. 28 years in our corrections department, eventually becoming the director of corrections, the first Asian American to be given that type of responsibility in California state government. So really a pathfinder for so many people. He was subsequently appointed the first Asian American as a U.S. Marshal, and he worked tirelessly as a U.S. Marshal within the law enforcement community to bring together diverse people, to bring people together in the common issues of law enforcement and strengthen relationships with communities up and down California. And he was eventually in 2000 awarded the Volunteer and Community Services Award in 2000 by our Attorney General of California in recognition of his work. He was also a champion of civil rights. He was elected the first national president of the Japanese Citizens League. He successfully advocated for the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1987. This is the one that authorized redress to Japanese Americans who were interned in camps. And in recognition of these efforts, he was named the Japanese American of the Biennium in 1992. And he was still active in civil rights matters with his wife, Dorothy. This Saturday night, we will have the annual MLK celebration dinner evening here in Sacramento. He and his wife forged this event. His wife, Dorothy, actually went to school with Martin Luther King, so they had a long tie over the decades with King and his family. And I just thank you all for this occasion to adjourn in his memory today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooley. Mr. Linder, you are recognized for your adjournment in memory.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Permission to use a prop?
Without objection.
Thank you. I rise today and ask that the House adjourn in the memory of Judith Russell. Judy was an avid participant and member of the community. She was very active in the cities of Riverside and Corona, and her entrepreneurship and volunteerism were an inspiration to all of those who were fortunate enough to meet her, including myself. Judy was the founding member and vice president of Phoenix Technology Incorporated for over 30 years. Her company, which I had the pleasure of working with, they sell these fire helmets and fire accessories. And I used to work when I was in high school at a company that actually manufactured the leather portions, the leather seals, and now they actually make some of the fire helmets out of the leather. Judy made the safety of firefighters one of her top priorities and was a huge philanthropist in her own right. She dedicated her life to helping many other people through volunteering in our community. Judy worked with the Navy League, Circle of Hope, this Corona Women's Improvement Club, and many other charities and organizations. She was a good friend of mine and a neighbor that I've known for many years. Just on a personal note, personal story, my family owns property in Mexico, vacation home, and there's a volunteer fire department out there, and it's mostly made up of retired American firefighters. And I had, my dad and I had asked for, since we knew that she did fire accessories, we're always looking for donations. And without question, I woke up the next morning, went outside the door, and there were 2 of these helmets waiting for me to take back to Mexico for the volunteer fire department down there. So I ask that the House adjourn in the memory of Judy Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Linder. Mr. David Chu, you are recognized from your desk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Along with Assembly Members Ting and Levine, I ask that we adjourn today in the memory of Paul Kantner, a founding member of the legendary rock band Jefferson Airplane, who passed away last week. Jefferson Airplane, later known as Jefferson Starship, was one of the definitive San Francisco and Marin rock and roll bands of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Born in San Francisco, Paul learned to play the guitar in our city, loved San Francisco as much as he loved his music. After attending Santa Clara University and San Jose State College, he dropped out of college to enter the music scene. In 1965, he founded Jefferson Airplane, which helped to create what became known as the San Francisco Sound. Paul's musical career took him to the Monterey Pop Festival, Woodstock, and collaborations with Crosby, Stills, and Nash and the Grateful Dead, among others. Jefferson Airplane bandmate Jorma Kaukonen described the airplane as an amazing aggregate of personalities and talent, with Paul as the catalyst that made the alchemy happen. In 1996, the group was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which describes Jefferson Starship as one of the defining bands of its era. He's survived by his daughter, China Eisler, his 2 sons, Gareth and Alexander, and 4 grandchildren. While Paul Cantor will be deeply missed, his rich music and spirit will live on forever, and we thank him for building our city on rock and roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. Members, a couple of brief recognitions. We would like to welcome a former member of this assembly to the floor today. Former Assembly Member Steve Bradford is with us today. Good to see you, sir. We also want to wish Mr. Eduardo Garcia a very happy birthday. Happy birthday, sir. And final announcement, members, the Rules Committee will be meeting upon adjournment in the Rules Committee room. That's Rules Committee in the Rules Committee room upon adjournment. Session schedule is as follows. Monday, February 8th, floor session at noon. Tuesday, February 9th, check-in session. Wednesday, February 10th, check-in session. Thursday, February 11th, floor session upon call of the Speaker. Friday, February 12th, floor session at 9 a.m. All other items remaining will be passed and retained. All motions shall be continued. Seeing and hearing no further business, I'm ready to entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Holden moves and Ms. Waldron seconds. That this House stands adjourned until Monday, February 8th at noon. Quorum call is lifted.